Hello, and welcome to Endless Becoming. My name is Ashna. I don't know if I say that every time, but maybe I should because why not? But welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. I'm actually feeling a little nervous for today's video. I don't know if I've shared this before, but I take intuition classes where I'm learning how to strengthen my intuition, how to listen to my inner voice, how to be more myself and do more of what I truly want to do because for a variety of reasons that I can go into at another time. There's just a lot of programming and a lot of noise that a lot of us feel, including myself. And I find that it's hard for me to figure out what it is I truly want to do versus what other people want me to do or what I've been taught to do or taught to want. So I've been taking these classes. And today I was talking to my teacher about in essence, struggling to be vulnerable. And I think sometimes that can sound really shocking to people because it's like, I share about all these things. I talk about my feelings freely. If you've been following me for a little bit or you follow my naturally grounded Instagram, I've shared about the miscarriage. And I also sometimes get a little confused with this, but I do think truly at the core, I still really struggle to be vulnerable. And I have come a long way. And there's a lot of feelings because I intellectualize my feelings so much. I feel like it's easier for me to share them because I'm like, it's almost like I move from feeling things in my body to my brain. I make sense of it and then I share it out. Not always. I've come a long, long, long way, but I think there's still a lot of fear around opening up, being vulnerable because ultimately I don't want to be shut down. I don't want to be hurt, and which I think a lot of us can relate to. And so it's really hard for me to share my true vulnerable feelings because I'm afraid of them not being received with care. And I'm afraid of being hurt ultimately at the base of it. And anyways, I was talking to my teacher about this and he encouraged me to share the things I might be scared of sharing or I might fear sharing. And so I decided to challenge myself and do just that today. Today's episode, I want to talk about grief. And I actually sat down to prep and not prep, but I do like to have an idea sometimes of what I generally want to talk about because otherwise I feel like, I can go on tangents, I can get confused, I can lose sight often, sometimes, not always. But as I started to write, my pen died out. And then I was kind of sitting there and I just asked the universe, should I just talk? And, should I, instead of prepping, should I just kind of talk, see what's on my heart, see what comes out and do it? And then I open my eyes and a wind blows and the branch that's right in front of me starts to like nod up and down. So I was like, okay, this is my sign from the universe that I'm just going to go for it. So thank you for being here and bear with me, please. I want to talk about grief. And if you have been following, or if you haven't, I went through a miscarriage earlier this year, around April, May time. It's so funny how time blurs. And I want to talk about this idea of grief because I feel like there's so much I've learned and keep on learning about grief. And as a bad advice, I don't even know what I thought grief would be like. I mean, like obviously people around me have lost people or um, bad things have happened to me or I've been hurt in the past, but I think nothing prepared me for this deluge. I don't know, hopefully I'm saying the word right, of like this deluge of grief, onset of grief that hit me like a bowling ball when the miscarriage happened. And I think maybe with this bad advice, I was kind of under the impression of like, okay, grief is like a bucket of water. or this bowling ball. If I think about this bucket of water, like there's only so much water in it. The more intense the event, the greater the loss, whatever that loss may look like. The bigger the bucket, the more the water, and eventually grief is just running through that bucket of water. And once I'm through with the bucket's empty and I can put it aside. And that doesn't mean I forget about this bucket. The bucket will live on, but it will be a bucket that's like maybe lives on in my heart and my soul, and it's just there as a reminder. Or like as a bowling ball, like I got hit by this grief. It's going to hurt me. It's going to take some time, but over time, like all the places this ball has damaged will heal. My bruising will heal. Anything that broke or got fractured will heal. And eventually I'll just be left with the memory that I got hit by this bowling ball. I really like analogies. What I'm coming to realize is that grief has been like this well. And sometimes it seems like I've run through all the water in the well is dry, the well is empty. Okay, no more grief. And then time goes by and I'm like, oh yeah, wait, like let me look at that well. And I go look at the well and it's full of water again. And then I realize, oh my gosh, there is all this pent up grief that has built up inside of me that now I need to acknowledge. And that's kind of been the pattern. And I also recently realized that one of my like trauma responses or defense mechanisms, if you will, that I have is when something really intense happens to me, I shut down my mind body connection. And what this looks like is my brain. I live up in my brain a lot. I'm like, yeah, I'm thinking, I'm feeling, but a lot of it is I'm intellectualizing a lot of things. I am looking at the world through a very rational lens. Like my mind is worrying, I'm doing calculations. Like that's how my brain works. When I'm not talking to my body starts to get hurt. It starts to get tight. I start to have aches and pains. And the longer and when my mind body connection is shut down, I don't really acknowledge what's going on in my body. I don't really feel those hurts or feel those pains or let what's coming up come up. And what I end up doing is like getting to a place where my body is in so much pain and it's crying out for help. And I'm not listening because I stopped listening because I told myself I don't want to listen. And I think I didn't even realize that after going through the miscarriage, obviously it has to do with my body, that in my grief, I think, in my sadness, in my anger, wanted to protect myself. And so I shut down that communication. And I'm very slowly starting to reconnect with my body. And I'm happy to share what that looks like later. But I think I really want to focus in on grief and how much I didn't expect for grief to hurt. Um, Not that it's been very long. I don't want to discredit myself. Obviously, the miscarriage happened in April, May. We're now in October, but I still find myself crying randomly. I met someone a couple last week, actually. This was a newer friend. I'd only hung out with her I'd only met her once before, but I ended up being like close to her hometown where she lives. So I asked to meet up and we ended up meeting up. And all of a sudden I found myself crying about the miscarriage. I didn't even know I was sad about it. I didn't even expect to cry. I didn't start the day sad. And I think that's what has caught me so off guard about grief. And that's like part of the bad advice that I kind of want to touch on is that there is probably what I'm realizing there's no one way to grief. But I think that as I am someone who has spent so much time getting in touch with her body and facing her fears, putting herself in discomfort, facing all those emotional traumas from my childhood, from my young adulthood. And even I struggle with the weight of grief. And it just makes me think that if someone who has come so far as me, and I'm not saying that to toot my own horn, I just know how hard and how far I have come over the last, like over years, where I used to be, where I am now. And I acknowledge that not a lot of people often prioritize doing inner work or putting in as much work as I have. And I know that. I talk to a lot of people. I have had many, many phases of life. And even I struggle to walk through grief. And I think what I really want to highlight for people is that grief does not take one shape or one form, but it might always be there is what I'm coming to realize. And that doesn't make me weak or mean I'm not strong. It just means that I feel so deeply. I have so much inside that needs to be felt. And I think that's what grief is. And when I first went through the miscarriage and I was, obviously starting to share with people, I heard so many people say things to me like, a lot of women go through it. It's okay. It happens. You're young. You'll just have another baby. And all of these platitudes almost felt like a slap in the face to me because here I was grieving, intensely grieving the loss of something that almost felt like had never been mine. And I had people telling me to pick myself up, dust myself off, and move on. My aunt called me, and I love my aunt. I have really great conversations with her, and I started crying on the phone with her. And this was probably a month after everything happened. And she was kind of like, "Why are you crying? It's time to pick yourself up and move on." And I'm not saying that that isn't true. I never want my grief to hold me back in life. I want it to shape me and make me a better person. But hearing all these people telling me to dust off and move on almost made me feel like, well, am I feeling wrong? Like, is grief supposed to be that bucket, right? Okay, grief is supposed to be a bucket, and I'm going to feel through the water in the bucket, and eventually I'm going to reach the bottom of my bucket. I'm going to be done. That's what people made me feel like. But as the months have gone on, I feel like there is just this constant welling up of emotion. And in an effort to protect myself and do what everyone told me to do, which was pick up and move on, I think I shut off feeling in my body because my body, strangely enough, this might be strange to you, might not be if you've done a lot of research on like or heard a lot about how the body often keeps the score of trauma, but my body had been feeling too much. And I think what I inadvertently did was shut off that connection because I could not feel anymore. And intellectually, I felt like, how could I grieve this much for something I had never had? And obviously, this is specific to me, grieving the loss of my pregnancy, of my baby or babies. I suspected I was having twins. um, but I think this message is for anyone out there who's ever told to pick up and dust off their grief and move on. Grief is not like that. Grief, I wrote a poem about this. Grief is like the ocean. Sometimes there are just soft waves coming to shore and you're feeling and you might be feeling good about it. But sometimes there is like massive waves and crashes and it hits you out of nowhere. Like, I don't know water terms, but like you're just sitting and it's really calm and all of a sudden a wave comes and knocks you over. Grief takes so many steps. And I think what I'm coming to realize is even if a part of me grieves this forever, which I don't know, maybe that might be the case, that's okay. And it is in my right. That's the good advice. It is in your right. It is in my right for grief to look like however it's supposed to look. If my grief lasts years, and it lasts years. If it lasts a month, it lasts a month. But I think the most important thing is to keep that pathway and gateway of emotions open. I never want to stop feeling. The second I stop feeling, I think that's one piece of good advice. The second you stop feeling is when problems start. And what I mean by that is the second you stop, you shut off connections to your emotions, you tell yourself, I don't have time for you, emotion. I don't have time for you, feeling. I don't have time for you, memory. You gotta shut down and I have to move on with my life. I think that's when problems start. That's when you start to have more emotional issues, physical manifestations, issues showing up in parts of your life. That's like one big piece of good advice that I want to give. Another piece of good advice that, oh my gosh, was just in my brain that I just lost is, oh my gosh, it was just in my brain. Oh my gosh, this is what happens. Why did you never told me not to prepare, but this is what happens when I don't always prepare. But I feel like, yeah, okay. Anyways, hopefully it'll come back to me. But yeah, I yeah, I really wanted to hone in on that message. I think that this topic of grief has been coming up for me so much recently, and especially because I recently learned that I had shut off this connection with my body and my body was talking to me and I hadn't been listening. And one way, if this does ever happen to you, that you can kind of get around it, or not get around it, support yourself through it, is acupuncture. I find that acupuncture for me is one of the most grounding things and most grounding ways for me to get into my body. And I actually went to my acupuncturist over the weekend and asked her to help me open up my mind body connection. And that's something she was able to do. And I know she was, because the night she did it, I came home and I cried to my husband about the miscarriage, which is something I hadn't cried about in so long. And I also find that acupuncture really opens up because it's such a physical thing. And because memories and trauma is stored in our body, I find that it really comes in and it opens up those parts of me that might be stuck. And to bring up my second piece of good advice, which just popped into my head, it's that I think another part of grief that I'm coming to realize is not another piece of good advice is not getting lost in it. I think it's very important to feel your feelings, feel everything that's going on, feel every part of grief, every part of that memory, that experience that wants to come up, that lives in your body, that wants to be acknowledged. And if you need to keep feeling that, feel that for however long you need to, and do not let anybody tell you anything otherwise. The other part of it that I think is so important, I don't think feeling grief is what is getting me lost in it. I think what would get me lost in the grief is if I didn't acknowledge what a beautiful gift it was. And I know that sounds kind of psychotic. And some time ago, I would have thought I was freaking crazy for even bringing this up in the first place. But I think that as awful and saddening and heartbreaking as my miscarriage was, I think it taught me so many lessons about myself, who I am, how strong I am, and what I'm capable of. And just to like give you a really quick like view into this, my miscarriage helped me realize how much of a failure I felt in every part of my life. And this isn't something, if you know me, that I ever would have acknowledged or ever would have thought was true, but feeling the failure of a miscarriage, I know that's not necessarily true. It's not my fault, but I do want to acknowledge that with my miscarriage, I felt like a failure. I felt like my body had failed me, like I had failed myself. But if it wasn't for this miscarriage showing to me how much I felt like a failure, I never would have realized how much I feel like a failure in my life. And I never would have realized that part of me was taking motherhood, was settling for motherhood. I've always wanted to be a mom. I know I've always wanted a family, but somehow I had convinced myself that motherhood is the only thing I would be good at, that creating and raising beautiful children and sending them out to do good into the world was the only thing I would ever accomplish. And motherhood is freaking hard. I'm not saying it's not difficult, but the miscarriage helped me realize that I have all these dreams, that I have all these things I want to accomplish, that I have all these people I want to work with, I want to help. And I never would have realized that if it wasn't for the miscarriage. My grief is teaching me such a beautiful lesson in feeling, in not shutting off those parts of myself that have so much to feel, that it's not a bad thing to feel. And most recently, my grief just taught me that I have this thing that I do, which is I shut off my mind body connection, and I shut my body off and I shut my body up. And that is not something I ever want to be doing. And obviously, like, this is an unprecedented situation and this was a really intense situation, but how many times do I do this in my life in small ways, as I am in this phase of my life, this season of my life now, reconnecting with my body, getting really grounded in my body, really feeling into everything that my body's been trying to tell me. I'm learning so much about myself. I'm learning so much about my strength, my ability to get through whatever may bowl me over, my ability to get through even the most hardest of situations. And my miscarriage was the hardest thing, hands down, I have ever gone through, the most painful thing I've ever gone through. And what a beautiful thing it is to feel so deeply and to learn all these lessons and to see the perfection in the way everything happened. And I fully, fully, fully believe that soul of my baby is still waiting for me, that he or she, I'm feeling like next baby might be a she, is going to come back, and I'm going to be 100 times the mother that I would have been before all of this. I have learned so much about my life, so much about myself, and I'm working on so many different things. And I know my children, my next baby, is going to benefit from all of these learnings. And that's something I never would have had. It's a growth I never would have had if it wasn't for this experience. So, to recap, I know that was a little bit of a mishmash, but I really felt like I needed to be said. There was a part of me that was really afraid to say all these things. Not afraid, but that there was fear around being so vulnerable. And I want to just reiterate that however we feel is how we feel, but it's so important to go back to my good advice to really feel everything, feel deeply, and take as long as we need to feel it, as long as you need, as long as I need to feel it. But the second piece of good advice is to start to see the perfection in the experience. That doesn't mean you have to love it, but it does mean trying to see, what is this experience teaching you? What is the grief teaching you? What did you learn from going through this? What did it teach you about yourself? What did it teach you about how much of a badass you are, about how strong you are, how resilient you are, how much perseverance you have? I think there's so many ways to reflect on the positive, and I think that is how we move through the grief. We don't move through the grief by shutting it down and pretending it doesn't exist, or telling ourselves we shouldn't feel this way for this long, but we move through the grief by feeling it and seeing how much it has taught us, because everything we go through in life is what I've learned. Everything we go through is for some higher lesson, higher learning. Everything we go through is making us more into the person we came here to be, more into the person we're supposed to be. Well, thank you for listening. Hopefully the lighting's okay. It got dark while I was talking. But yeah, thank you so much for being here. If you're going through anything like this, I would love to talk, whether it's miscarriage or whether it's grief in general. I feel like I have so many learnings about going through a miscarriage that I really want to start to share more and more slowly. But thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day, night, evening, week, weekend, wherever you are. I really appreciate you watching this episode of Endless Becoming. And please, please, please reach out if you need anything or want to talk about anything. I would love to hear from you.